welcome. I'm Kathy Schmitz, Executive Director of the Vilas County Economic Development Corporation. And again, thank you for joining us on this absolutely beautiful fall day that we have today. If you're planning to buy, build, or expand your business in Vilas County, or if you know of someone who is, that's just great. And so you're at the right place. And so one topic that is often overlooked in the planning process is zoning. And so over the next hour, we'll explore local zoning ordinances with our guest speaker, David Sodenwasser. And David is the zoning administrator for the Vilas County Zoning Department. As mentioned in the promotion, Dave is here today to talk about choosing the appropriate property for business use, septic system requirements for business use, and regulatory costs and timelines for establishing a business. But before we begin, we extend our special thanks, as always, to Associated Bank for their generous support of this program and our mission to help new and existing business owners with business planning and financial guidance, marketing and social media, and educational programs like today, and all at no charge. And so what questions do you have for Dave? Please put them in the chat and we'll get to them right after his presentation. With that, Dave, take it away.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you. We got a short presentation that we'll kind of give. It'll explain who we are and what we do and how what we do impacts the businesses of Vilas County, and especially kind of the three things that Kathy talked about. Zoning is always going to be one of the things that businesses have to sort of deal with or overcome. Unfortunately, we tend to be a bigger hurdle the later in the process you do it. I really appreciate the opportunity because I think it's important for business owners or people who are looking to begin a business to get involved with us early, because some of the things that we talk to them about or that we regulate or that our sort of industry partners regulate can oftentimes change their time frames or how they commit their resources. This is just a quick PowerPoint as to what we got going on. So here's my agenda today. We're going to do introductions, teach you a little bit about our office and what we do and how we do it. We'll talk about choosing the right property. We'll talk about requirements for septic systems, which vary widely for commercial uses. This is the septic system at the brake brush factory down in central Wisconsin, and it's the most immense thing I've ever seen. We're also going to talk about the time and money for the permitting process and the things that can change that or cause that equation to change. We'll start with a little bit of an introduction as to our office and what we do. We are an office currently of 8 people. There are 4 deputy zoning administrators with designated territories, and the map you see in front of there only has 3. Our 4th young lady named Tess, she's pretty new, so she doesn't have a territory yet, but she will with time. And the reason I put those up and focus on them is our deputy zoning administrators do the daily work of permit issuance. So they're a great resource for a potential business owner who's looking at a site to talk about the requirements that there will be for that site. They specialize kind of within their town, so they're also really good at knowing what other entities may have to be. So Caleb takes care of sort of the eastern third of the county, Eagle River area, Conover Phelps. Mitch has the northwestern corner, Boulder Junction, Winchester, Presque Isle, Mantress Waters, and Lando. And Tammy has the sort of southwest third of the county. They are a great resource and a great first point of contact for business owners who are looking to locate a business in Vilas County. We have 2 proposed positions, which as of earlier today were approved, that will deal with septics and tourist rooming houses. The septic one especially will be good for business in Vilas County because it will allow us to continue really quick service on septic permits. We are based out of the county courthouse in Eagle River. If you want to come sit with us, you're more than welcome and visit us. We're happy to have meetings, but we don't have any office hours in the outlying portions of the county at this time. But we are always here 8 to 4 on weekdays to answer your phone calls and help businesses through the regulatory environment. What do we do? Essentially, we do a couple things. We regulate the size, shape, location, and use of a structure. So my ordinances pertain to where it is, how big it is, and what it's used for. My regulations don't get into how structures are built. So I'm not going to ask for building plans to make sure that your heat calcs are large enough. I'm not going to make sure that it can accommodate snow loads. I'm interested in size, location, and use of the structure. We also regulate use of property, and you see in front of us is the zoning map for the town of Cloverland. We do that through laying zoning districts on the ground throughout the county. So if we look at the map here, you'll see a bunch of different colors kind of applied to the town of Cloverland. Those districts allow different types of use. So the yellow that you see is single family residential, would not be a place where you would generally want to start a business use because it's likely not allowed. The all-purpose areas are a little bit more broadly defined. General business is that sort of tealish looking color or sea green looking color that allows for a mix. So that's how we accomplish. And ultimately, one of the things that we're trying to do is separate incompatible uses. We don't want to have things like residences next to a rendering facility, right? Because that can cause all sorts of problems. So we do that through zoning districts that are laid upon the land. We also regulate land disturbance and vegetative removal, especially in areas along the shoreline as part of our shoreland work, which is not necessarily so impactful with choosing your business location, but it is something that we do. We also permit, regulate, and inspect septic systems, which are often called POUTs. It stands for Private On-Site Wastewater Treatment Systems. We regulate, permit, and inspect those county-wide. And POUTs can be one of the things, septic systems, that really greatly affect operation and planning and resources for a business. So we do some other things too. I'll just touch on them. We regulate wireless towers. So a lot of the broadband stuff that I hear Mr. Tuckwell talk about on a regular basis, when the fiber lines aren't in the ground, they're on wireless towers. And so we do a lot of work with that. We also regulate non-metallic mines, which for you and I means gravel pits. We deal with reclamation, inspection, and regulation of those. We also regulate floodplain development. This photo that kind of just popped up is a house being flood proofed, where they're trying to raise the lower level above flood regulation. We don't have a ton of floodplain here in Vilas County because we're fortunate enough to be on the headwaters, but we do regulate that. We also regulate land division, which is, anytime we're going to do dividing of land, subdivisions for development, we regulate that. Just because we didn't have enough to do, we have solid waste and recycling duties as well. We are the agent that takes state recycling money and disperses it to the towns. We also do tourist rooming houses, but I want this to be a nice time, so we won't talk about that. Where do we do it? We do the work that we've been talking about the last couple slides in the unincorporated areas of Vilas County. So a lot of what I'm talking to you about today isn't going to apply in the city of Eagle River. They have their own standards, their own ordinances that they enforce, and they have city sewer, which is a great resource there. So anything that happens in the city of Eagle River, you would deal direct with the city, and we would be out of the equation. Outside of that, we have zoning jurisdiction throughout the county, with the exception of 3 towns: Lac du Flambeau, Manitowish Waters, and Presque Isle. Those towns to date have not accepted our general zoning authority, so we only regulate areas there 1,000 feet from a lake or 300 feet from a river. Those who are familiar with those 3 towns know that there aren't a lot of areas that don't fall within that. So generally, you would deal with both the town and the county. In areas outside that, though, you would just deal with town zoning. The last sort of caveat there is we don't have jurisdiction for lands that are within the reservation boundary that are held in trust by the tribe or owned by tribal members. Those lands are regulated solely by the Lac du Flambeau tribe. So we just do tax land on non-tribal members within the reservation boundary. So if you have a business opportunity and you want to work within the reservation, absolutely, I would recommend that they work and talk to the tribal authorities there. Now, why do we do it? A lot of people wonder what we do and why we do it. Our mandate in statute is to do it to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. In reality, what that means is we're trying to balance the rights of property owners to do what they want on their property and the effects of those decisions on the public good. We're also trying to separate incompatible uses, and we're trying to protect natural resources and the public trust. But ultimately, that second point is probably the biggest one. We're trying not to infringe the right of property owners to do what they wish on their property. But when those decisions start to have effects outside of that property boundary, we have to also ensure the public good. Separation of incompatible uses is one of those things. If you put up a industrial complex in the middle of a residential area, that can affect all the residences around. It can affect the ability to maintain safety for people by the health department or the fire department. And that's all part of that sort of balance between property owners and the public good. So let's talk about some of the things that potential businesses need to be concerned about from a zoning aspect. When we talk about choosing the appropriate property, that's always an exciting time, I imagine, in any business development. But there are some questions that we have to ask and some things that we need to consider. The first is the question of whether that business is permitted on the property. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth here. That means looking at the zoning district. I'm going to tell you that these next two words, zoned commercial, they're red now because I hate those words. I see them all the time. I see them on realtor signs on the side of the road. I see them in ads. I see them on Zillow. There is no such thing in Vilas County as zoned commercial. I want to be really clear about that. We have lots of zoning districts that allow commercial uses, absolutely, but they don't allow every commercial use. So if you're going to come and say that your business is a motor freight terminal, you want to have a trucking warehouse, just because a zoning district allows commercial uses doesn't mean it allows that particular use. Beware if you're ever looking at a property or you have people you're working with who are looking at a property and they go, oh, it's zoned commercial. It probably allows for some degree of commercial use. It just needs to be specific for the one that they have. Property size is also an important aspect here. As a general rule, we have a minimum property size to be able to do development on, and certain uses have larger standards that they need. Sewer versus septic is also going to be a large thing, and I know there's some people sort of on the chat here who have we've talked about this for. There is a tipping point where for certain things, the septic system can become prohibitively expensive. And so whether or not a property has access to municipal sewer can be a very important consideration you need to make when choosing property. Most of Vilas County operates on septic systems. Municipal sewers are available in Land O'Lakes, Phelps, Eagle River, Lac du Flambeau, and Arbor Vitae. Sometimes you could have a really great idea and great location for a business, but it might become untenable if you have to do it with a septic system. Last would be proposed equipment that you need or certain building codes that might cause you to have to rethink what you're doing or find different sites or ideas, and we'll get to those a little bit more in just a minute. Let's start with zoning districts and permitted uses. I've pulled this little bit of snippet you have here. This is downtown Sainer in the town of Plum Lake. Each of those districts you see there, GB is general business, CB is community business. The yellow R1 is single family residential. The purple is all purpose. Each one of those has a list of uses, a list of things that can be done within that district. Those are codified in the Vilas County General Zoning Ordinance, but we do have a table that is available on our website that lists the different uses that you can do in each of these zoning districts. There's three different types of uses that we break down. There are permitted uses, which are allowed to be done by right of a simple zoning permit. There are conditional uses, which are uses that are broadly similar to what else is allowed, but which need a little bit extra oversight, and those have to get what's called a conditional use permit and go through a public hearing. There are also combinations. So if you are going to do a business that has multiple different types of use, the zoning district needs to be appropriate for all of them. An example of that would be if you are going to run a business that sells snowmobiles and also repairs them. Those might be a little bit different. A good example of what to look for when you're trying to choose a location is if you came to me and you wanted to buy a property right here, downtown Sainer, in community business, and you told me that you wanted to put a roadside stand in there, I would tell you that that's not an allowable use in community business. And if your business is based on a delivery system that involves a roadside stand, that's not a good spot for you. It's an important thing to go and ask ahead of time.
Real quickly, David, what is the difference between a general business use and a community business use?
Well, they're two different districts. So what you would do is you would call our office or go online to our website and you can see what uses are allowed. Community business is unique and it was designed for the downtown areas of our unincorporated communities. So places like downtown Sainer, downtown Boulder Junction is a really good example. And it allows for very tight development and it removes a lot of the things that go with requirements for commercial uses in our ordinance. So it removes things like parking requirements, it removes a lot of the setbacks we have, and it's really designed for tight, compact downtown areas. But because it's designed for that compactness, there's a lot of uses that we don't allow that need larger amounts of land or have a outsized impact on neighboring properties because they don't fit with that compactness of development. General business is going to be similar to a lot of them, but it requires a little bit of a larger lot size. And so then there's more things that might be allowed that generally involve a little bit more noise, a little bit more traffic, a little bit more parking requirements. Property size is another important thing to look at. We do have a minimum lot size for off-water properties in Vilas County. It is an acre and a half. That does vary by zoning district. So the forestry district is one that gets a lot of people. We require a 5 acre minimum in forestry. But generally, it's an acre and a half off water. It's usually 20,000 square feet on water. Whether or not there's access to municipal sewer is also dependent. So we do allow a smaller lots and greater density on sewered sites because we don't have to account for a lifetime of septic system installation. That's why the sewered sites get smaller ones. It's also important, again, when you're looking at property, whether or not you can fit a large enough septic for your proposed business on it. Keep in mind, we have extra area requirements for additional units or uses. So if you were to come and say want to build a 5 unit commercial strip mall, you're going to need that acre and a half for the building, but then you're going to need additional land for each of the extra units beyond the first. Another time where this often gets in would be a hotel or motel. There's a multiplier for each room that you need additional space. So we have a whole section in our general ordinance called Article 5 that lists requirements for specific uses. Certain uses require more land. Even though you have an acre and a half lot that you may be looking at, I'll use hotel and motel because that's the most common one we have. That requires a 5 acre minimum if you have a septic. Marinas require a 5 acre minimum. Mobile home parks require 5 acres of land. Campgrounds require 5 acres of land. So just because you find a lot that meets the minimum lot size requirement doesn't mean it requires it for that particular use. Well, I've highlighted in the drawing here, and I apologize, it's kind of dim. There's a blue highlighted lot right in the middle in the town of Saint Germain. It's vacant. It's about an acre in size. If you came to me and wanted to open a campground there, I would tell you that that's not allowed by our zoning ordinance. So it's really important to look that not only is it zoned correctly, but also that the size is appropriate. The last little bullet point there is parking. We do have parking requirements for different commercial uses to accommodate customers that you're going to have coming in. So you have to also make sure that there's enough parking available or enough lot available to do your parking. The last thing I want to touch on when we sort of look at that is building codes and proposed equipment. When we look at building for commercial buildings, there are certain types of commercial buildings and certain sizes of commercial buildings where you have to have the state review your building plans first. Generally, that's 25,000 cubic feet under roof for most businesses. There are some businesses like schools or hospitals where you have to have approval no matter what. That can affect how you go about designing your site. If you need special things in your building like fire suppression, ventilation, or extra foundation for heavy things under commercial code, that can affect how you go forward with your plans as well. The last thing is equipment you used going to be approved by the state. So let's say that you're proposing to open a brewery. Is the equipment you're going to use to treat the waste from your brewing processes allowed by the state? I don't know if that really goes into choosing the right location, but that goes into choosing the right building. So if you're looking to use an existing building for your business, those are extra things you may want to think about. I'd like to take a little time to talk about septic requirements for pouts or for commercial, excuse me. There's some good and there's some bad here when we talk about commercial septic systems. And there's two things that really impact commercial septic systems. One is the size. And generally, believe it or not, commercial septic systems are smaller than residential ones. And the reason is because the nature of the use of the building is different, right? When you're at home, People living there full time, they're flushing toilets, they're taking showers, you're creating kitchen waste, you're running a washing machine, right? In commercial settings, you don't often have that, right? You have occasional use by your employees and your customers in the bathroom. If you have a bar or a restaurant, you have kitchen waste, but generally they're smaller. Septic code is written by the state and it allows you to compute the sizing calculations for commercial in a number of different ways. If you have an existing building, you can put a water meter on. If you have another building or another business that's of similar type, you can use data from that. That also provides a chart. There is a chart that we use, plumbers and regulators do, that can give some assumptions for different commercial uses. You would work with your plumbing professional or the county to kind of figure out how big of a septic you would need. But generally, commercial septics are a little bit smaller than residential. When we talk about septics, it's important to note we have to aggregate uses together. If you are going to open a business that has a bakery that you're going to bake things to go offsite, you're also going to have a small restaurant and coffee shop to serve your baked goods in, and you want to have an apartment upstairs to live in, we have to aggregate together all of those things. And your septic needs to be big enough to accommodate the bakery use, the restaurant use, and the apartment. We do add those together. We also have to look at things like outdoor seatings and to-go meals, right? Because if you're doing a really great to-go service out of your restaurant, you may not be having a lot of customers coming in, but you're still creating a lot of effluent and water. 12,000 gallons per day is the magic number. At 12,000 gallons per day wastewater, you have to start getting DNR oversight of your septic system as well. And that usually means denitrification. It's kind of hard to hit 12,000 gallons per day. Mobile home parks hit it pretty easily. We start to see some resorts and campgrounds push that, but that's sort of a size tipping point where things can change. The other major component with septics for commercial use is the strength of the water coming out. It may sound counterintuitive at first, but what comes down the pipe isn't always the same in terms of how it is able to be treated by septic systems. There's four major sort of categories the state looks at of strength. There's domestic wastewater, which is things that are similar to your home, right? And the vast majority of commercial businesses are going to have domestic wastewater strength. An office building, if you're going to have like an outdoor sports park that you want to have bathrooms for, retail stores, anything that basically is average customers coming in and your employees are generally going to have domestic strength wastewater. And they can be treated by same types of septics that are done in the home. The second type is at risk. These are ones where there's a potential for them to have higher strength wastewater, but not necessarily. So at-risk systems are generally allowed to go in like a less difficult domestic one or a less robust domestic one, but they require monitoring over time to see exactly what the strength is coming out. That would be things like a daycare where you serve meals, or nursing homes are considered at risk by the state. So oftentimes when we build systems for those types of facilities, we build them to accommodate domestic, but they have accommodation in there to be expanded to high strength if they need to be. The next is high strength waste, things like bars, restaurants, schools. It says dump station there because if you're a campground and you're going to have a dump station for your RVs, that's considered high strength. High strength waste are things that are high in fats, oils, grease. So that's where we get restaurants in there. It can be things that are high in biosolids. That's where bars come in. Bars, believe it or not, send a lot of sugar down and a lot of like in the beer and the alcohol waste can cause disruptions in the sort of treatment train. Schools are high strength because they have really, really high concentrations of urine because every kid goes potty at school, but not everybody does other stuff. So we look at those different. The last is non-domestic. So certain types of things like breweries, the waste from your brewing process, kennels, if you have a dog kennel, or if you have like a business where you're washing dogs or grooming dogs, the kennel and grooming waste is non-domestic. If you're a mechanic and you have a drain in the bottom of your shop, that is considered non-domestic. These are the things on a commercial system that really, really change the scale in terms of cost and complexity. So when we look at commercial systems, if you hit the 12,000 gallons per day threshold, generally the DNR is going to make you do denitrification. If you're at risk, there's additional costs for monitoring. If you're high strength, the treatment components that are required by the state are expensive. The things in these red boxes will add a zero to the cost of your septic system. Your average commercial septic system for, say, a retail store is going to be in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. The average septic system for a restaurant or somewhere where you're making food is going to be more around $200,000. And that can, as you guys are well aware, very, very drastically alter the plans for a business to be opening or for how you use your resources. So it's important to know ahead of time, and it's important to be honest about what you're doing, because nothing will cause a screeching halt more than me knocking on your door and telling you that the septic you thought was fine isn't for what you're doing. If you're looking to locate in an existing building and you are going to a building that previously had domestic wastewater coming out and now it's going to be high strength, you could be in for huge upgrades to the septic system. So it's a very important consideration if you're not able to be on city sewer, especially if we go to larger things or businesses that tend to produce high strength waste. So we talk about time and money. Those are the things that everyone, when you're in business, right, it's time and money. And when we talk about the regulatory process and the permitting process, how much time and money you have to expend on that really depends. The more complicated your site and your business is, the longer and more expensive the process is. So if you're just going to deal with my office and it's a relatively easy thing, like let's say, for instance, you're an accountant and you want to open your own accountant office and you're going to buy an office that used to be a retail store. Generally, your waste is going to be pretty similar. Generally, your use is going to be pretty similar, and you probably just deal with my office. Your permitting process is going to be pretty short and relatively affordable. But once some of the other regulatory agencies get involved, like larger commercial buildings or large septic systems, once other regulatory agencies get involved and we start to require things like professionally engineered plans and surveys, that can sort of extend things out. Let me take you through some numbers and some scenarios so you can kind of get an idea. When we talk about permit and costs, this is just for the construction, okay, of, say, a new business. Your zoning permit just through my office is going to cost, depending on the size of the building, we charge 20 cents a square foot for buildings. Generally, a commercial permit in my office costs somewhere between $300 and $1,200. Like, again, that's depending on the size of the building, and it's a 7 to 10 day process for my part of the permitting. If your particular site or your particular proposed business starts to kick in other things, like your business is a conditional use permit and requires that, that's an additional $600 fee, and then that's an extra 30 to 60 days on the process. The reason being, conditional use permits have to have publication in the paper, a public hearing, etc. So you can see how choosing the right property just there already can cause you a delay of 2 months in your timeline just through the things in my office. If you're in for a conditional use permit, you're probably going to need a survey, and I'm not going to tell you how much your survey is going to cost or how long it's going to take, because that's going to vary. But my guess is the surveyor is probably not leaving his office for less than $1,000. And we have pretty much 3 working surveyors in Vilas County these days. So the wait time on those can be a little bit long as they go through their workload. If you need things like wetland delineations, you're in for another couple thousand and probably a few more months. If you start to have a larger business that starts to exceed impervious surface limitations or gets to be more than an acre of land disturbance, you may kick in stormwater permit requirements with the county and the DNR. Those generally are $250 to $800 of additional permit fees in 30 to 60 days. When you're dealing with stormwater permits, especially at the DNR level, you're probably hiring a professional engineer to decide and to design your stormwater mitigation practices. So then there's the additional expense and time there. If your building exceeds 25,000 cubic feet area under roof, then you're looking at commercial plan approval through the state. Their permits are based on the size. Stopped at 20,000 square feet because I didn't figure beyond that. I kind of figured we're in a different stratosphere, but those approvals can cost $50 to $2,500 and add another 30 to 60 days. You're also probably then having to hire an architect or a professional engineer with the associated time and cost there. The septic permit, if you're not on city sewer, is going to go through my office and cost somewhere between $350 and $500. And our turnaround on septic permits are generally 3 to 14 days. So kind of depending on what we got going on there, we're pretty quick. But in commercial, very generally, you also need a plan review by the state for commercial things. That's $250 to $500. And right now they're 7 to 14 days out. But at the height of the season, they might be longer. Once you get into your septic permits, you're also going to need the assistance of a plumber, a certified soil tester, and possibly a professional engineer with the associated costs that come there. If you're developing a new site and you need to go onto a road, you're likely going to contact the DOT, your county, or your town, the county highway department, or the town to get a road access permit to connect to their road. DOT is free. County and town access permits cost usually $100 at the max. There is a time frame there of 14 to 28 days. Once you get all those, then you get to deal with your builder and the associated costs and timeframes that come with that. I'm not trying to scare anybody here. I'm not trying to make a case for over or under regulation. I'm just trying to build the idea that as things get more complex on your particular site and for your particular business, the costs and the timeframes can go up dramatically. If I total up just the permitting fees there on the high end, you're looking at about $6,200 in fees and 8 to 9 months of permitting time. Some of these things, these permit things can happen simultaneously, right? You can have reviews for your pouts and your commercial building happening at the state at the same time. You can have people working on your stormwater permit, while you're going through your cup. So you can kind of run these together, but having the conversations ahead of time will start to allow businesses to have reasonable expectations for how much time and money they're going to spend before they ever put a shovel in the ground. So just an overview, kind of what we talked about. Here is sort of my recommended list, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I would always recommend if you're looking to do a business that very early you come and talk to zoning, either in the city or the particular town or the county. And the reason is a lot of times we're your first point of contact that can get you in to talk to all these other people or tell you what you need in terms of these other permits on the slide we just looked at. My staff and myself generally, we deal with this all the time. That's our job. So we can tell you, yes, you're going to need commercial building approval. Yes, the septic there is probably big enough. Here's the things that you need to add. Yep, and we can likely give you contacts for all those other regulatory agencies as well. You can certainly work with a realtor on finding your spot, but if you come to talk to us first, we can kind of direct you as to sort of the types of property you should have your realtor to be looking for. Then you can begin talking to soil testers and plumbers and building contracts and so forth. Ultimately, zoning is going to be a hurdle in the process of opening a business. There's no way around it. It's going to be the one of many of the hurdles you have to cross. The thing about zoning is if you come to us early, we're a normal hurdle in the process. If you put us at the end, we tend to be more of a brick wall. I would rather work with a business early on to make sure that they can find a property that meets my regulations than for me to ever have to knock on a door and tell somebody I have to shut their business down. I don't want to do that. And if am able to be involved early in the process, I can help businesses, or our staff can help businesses get into the right properties and understand the regulatory environment and requirements going ahead. So that's kind of my pitch now. This is where you can find us. We're at the courthouse in Eagle River. We have a lot of things available at www.vilascountyzoning.com. You can find all the contact numbers for us there, contact numbers for people at the state, and all sorts of information about zoning. But we're not trying to stop business development. We're not trying to hinder business development, but it needs to be done within the framework of our regulations. And it tends to be just a lot easier to have that happen early on as opposed to later in the process. So we can do questions now, and we can start with the ones in the chat. So Ross asked, what are the exact rules for demolishing or rebuilding a structure within 75 feet of the water? We have very specific rules for things within 75 feet of the water. They're set down by the state. It's kind of dependent on how close your structure is to the ordinary high water mark. The general rule is that if you have a structure there, you can continue to maintain it. You can tear it down and rebuild it in the same footprint. And you can generally do additions upward or downward. If the entirety of your structure is located behind 35 feet from the water, you are allowed 200 square feet of expansion within the setback. So you can enlarge the footprint 200 square feet as long as you don't go closer to the water. And that enlargement of the footprint can have a second story or a basement if you want. Behind 75, you can kind of go, hog wild. That's the Cliff Notes version. But generally, you can do those things. If you have things that are there, you can replace them. If they're what we call non-conforming, they have to generally be replaced in the same footprint, size, shape, and use. Or if they're going to change, they have to conform. But we have several handouts and things that we can provide, and you can certainly talk with our deputy zoning administrators if you have a specific thing that you're looking for within 75 feet of the water. We're glad to help with that. So Ritzer's asked about building a space for office and 4 garage stalls on their property. What is the best way to build for business on personal property? They're zoned all purpose in Eagle River. It depends on the extent of the business that you're going to have, right? We do allow to some degree what are called home occupations, and those are allowed in all residential areas. So if you can meet our definition of a home occupation, that's generally no problem. Obviously, home occupations would be things like if you're making candles and you're sending them out mail order, or you're teaching piano lessons, or anybody who's got their home office for their building. So any of the folks here that have an office in their house for their work with the VCEDC would generally fit under home occupations. Pest control. Okay. If you're going to just have your couple of pest control things there and it's only and you can meet home occupation, it's generally not an issue. If you're going to have people coming there, if you're going to have more than 3 employees that are not your family, then you need to be able to have enough land to have pest control, commercial business, and your home. So you would need to have 3 acres. You can build the structure to accommodate both. One of the things we run into with home occupations is you can only devote so much of the area to the business. So if your pest control business is going to take up more than 50% of the gross floor area of the home, or if your pest control business is going to require outside storage, then it starts to fall out of the home occupations, and we would just have to get you permitted appropriately for your new building and make sure that you meet all the standards. If you're in the Eagle River area, your guy to talk to is Caleb in our office, and he can sit down and go through exactly what you think your business is going to be now, what you think it may be in the future, right? Because that's very important. It may meet a home occupation definition now, but as you become more successful, it may get out of that. I've had that with other businesses where I had to say to a guy, you're kind of at your limit of what you can do on your home property now. And he went out and found some other property as to grow his business on. But Caleb would be your guy in the Eagle River area to go over kind of where those thresholds are and exactly what you need.
Dave, this was one of the most thorough presentations I've ever seen. So thank you so much for all that information. I had a whole list of questions for you as well, but covered all of them. So one of the questions that I do have that I thought might be helpful to answer is, what documents should people kind of start accumulating or have ready if they're starting to think about, expanding their business or starting a business on a certain property? What generally do people need to have already to go?
What we really need to know is, don't necessarily need the documents. I mean, it's important. One of the things we're going to look at, and I guess this is important, is that you actually own your property, or that the owner is knowledgeable about what you're doing there. If you walk into our office 20 minutes after your closing, we're probably not going to put permits through for you until the documents get recorded with the Register of Deeds. But documentation, we don't always need a lot. What we really need is honesty as to what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be doing it. The reason I say that is because if you come to me and you tell me, I'm going to have a coffee shop and I'm going to sell muffins that come prepackaged, that's a very different thing in my septic world than it is if you're going to make the muffins on site, right? You cross thresholds there. So honesty about what you're doing so we can direct you appropriately. An idea as to what your business is going to have in terms of number of customers, how big you want it to be, how you think you're going to expand it in the future, what are your needs going to be for indoor and outdoor storage, how many vehicles, all that kind of stuff. So we can sort of direct you appropriately. Because the last thing I want to do is send you in the wrong direction, right? As a new business, you have enough things to keep track of and you're expending resources on enough things. You don't need to do it on a wild goose chase because zoning didn't know exactly what you were doing. So be honest with my staff and myself what you want to do, what your long-term plans are, and we can help you point you towards what to look for in a property. Or if you're flexible, what thresholds to stay under before you get into those more complicated things.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that, my takeaway from this today, and perhaps others on the Zoom here, is that while this is very complex, I believe that your office actually makes this very easy for people. Got the Q&As ready to go. You've got the information that they need. There's a checklist of what they need, where to go, how much it'll be, who to contact, all of it. So I think I found this very helpful, at least for our office. We've had several occasions, Jim and I, to work with your office, David, and you guys have been fabulous, very knowledgeable, very easy to work with. So I would recommend that anybody on this Zoom or others to absolutely contact David and his staff. They're just fabulous to work with. And I just want to, on behalf of the BC EDC, thank you all for joining us.